welcome back to the Sports Gambling Education Webinar Series. My name is Scott Shelton here at Cyanna Education Services, and I'm very excited to kick off what should be an enlightening and engaging session with Matt Holt. He's the founder and president of U.S. Integrity, and along with him, he's got a panel of experienced state regulators from the gaming and sports wagering industry. So that includes Mia, Kevin, and Brian from the states of Colorado, Pennsylvania, and Washington, respectfully. So before we get started, I want to thank all of our panelists for being so generous with their time, and as well as a round of thanks to the team at U.S. Integrity in Las Vegas and to the Ohio University's Masters in Sports Administration program in Athens, Ohio. Both USI and OU have been working this summer and into the fall to partner with a number of subject matter experts developing what is our third course. And so I'm excited to announce today that course will be going live on Monday, November 16th. So the title of the course is Innovation and Insights from the Sports Gambling Stakeholders. And this course is made up of 5 different educational modules. This includes the cross-section of innovation, that's wagering and the XFL, with Basil DeVito. He's a former XFL president. He's on the WWE board of directors and a former executive with the Breeders' Cup and the NBA. We've got cracking the code, integrating wagering into the sports industry with Basil DeVito and Matt Casciato from OU, and from content to customer, potential ways to experience growth with Basil DeVito and Jim Kile at OU. Our final 2 modules in this course are pandemic and partnerships. That's innovation in an unprecedented year with Steve Pastorino. He's an SVP and head of business operations here at U.S. Integrity. And finally, operations and entrepreneurship, sportsbook innovation from an operator's perspective. That's with Robert Walker at U.S. Bookmaking. So again, it's available November 16th. You can find this information, including photos and information about our new subject matter experts, at www.sportsgamblingeducation.com. My final bit of housekeeping before we get things started is, as you know, course 1 and 2 in our 3-course certification series were released this spring and summer, and those courses have been updated this week. So, as you know, the sports gambling industry moves at an extremely rapid pace, and as such, we've gone back through most all of the supplemental reading materials and links to include information on what has been a very busy 2020. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's discussion leader. That's Mr. Matt Holt of U.S. Integrity. Matt has decades of experience in the sports wagering and integrity markets, most recently as the COO of CG Analytics, a Cantor Gaming affiliate. CGA set the gold standard for differentiated and successful fraud prevention and game integrity services. And Matt developed and implemented a suite of algorithms and proprietary tools to detect game manipulation that leverage more than just line movement. And prior to CGA, Mr. Holt was the VP of Business Development at Cantor Gaming. And today, he serves as the president of U.S. Integrity in Las Vegas, Nevada, providing customized sports integrity solutions for NCAA conferences, universities, professional leagues, and individual teams. And he also works closely with regulators and from numerous gaming control boards, and offers a variety of fraud detection tools for sportsbooks. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Matt Holt.
Thanks, Scott. I don't know about the decades thing. You're starting to date me there. I'm trying to convince my kids I'm still young and hip. No, thanks, everybody. We have a great panel today. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I always get really excited when we have the opportunity to talk to relevant stakeholders that are actually working in the space every day and trying to help some of the problems and generate some regulations that make sense. What are the best things to do for business? And we have three great panelists today, and we're going to try to get into a little bit of their background, how they got into the regulatory environment, some of the things that they cover, some of the challenges that they face, and some of the exciting things that are on the horizon. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and announce the panelists today, starting with Kevin Kile, the Director of Sports Wagering Operations for the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. Mia Tsuchimoto, sports betting team lead for the Colorado Division of Gaming, and Brian Considine, legal and legislative manager for the Washington State Gambling Commission. Thank you all for taking the time today. We really appreciate it. And I was thinking maybe as a way to start, Kevin, Mia, and Brian, you guys could give a little history of your background and how you got into regulated gaming. So Kevin, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Sure. Thanks for having me today, Matt. I've been involved in the gaming and horse racing industries for over 20 years now. I began my role as a regulator over the past 15 years. So 15 of my 20 years has been as a regulator with the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. My current role is the Director of Sports Wagering Operations, as you indicated, where I'm responsible for the overall direction and coordination of the implementation of sports wagering in the Commonwealth and the ongoing regulatory oversight of the industry moving forward. We're still in the implementation phase here in Pennsylvania. We're about halfway through, but it's been pretty successful to date. So I'm excited in the new role in the new industry here in Pennsylvania, and I'm happy to have a good conversation with you all today.
Thanks, Kevin. Mia?
Yeah, so I'm Mia Tsuchimoto. I've been with the Department of Revenue, where the Division of Gaming falls, for approximately 20 years. I recently joined the Division of Gaming in February, right before COVID hit. So it certainly has been a challenge. I did help or assist with starting the tobacco enforcement unit for the Liquor Enforcement Division, as well as helping with developing the medical and retail marijuana enforcement divisions for the state. And again, like I said, I have only been here since February, so there's a lot to learn. It's an exciting time where we have sports betting in Colorado, and fun to see and exciting to see where I'm excited to see where it's going to go when COVID isn't here and we have regular sports, and so excited to be here.
Thank you very much, Mia. Brian?
Thanks, Matt, and Mia and Kevin. Good to see you again. My name is Brian Considine. I'm the legal and legislative manager for the Washington State Gambling Commission. We are an independent gambling agency and law enforcement as well. I'm about to hit my 5th year anniversary with the commission, and I work, I have multiple hats. I do all of our legislative lobbying, and then I also do legal, public records, and rulemaking. And, you know, when we bring on a new activity like sports wagering, which was just passed this past March, that kind of runs, everything kind of runs through my little unit. And I know we're going to talk about it some, more. I never thought I was actually going to get into gaming. I think when I got out of law school. So prior to this, I was at the Washington State Attorney General's office for 8 years doing mostly federal and state litigation for multiple state agencies. But I got my first taste because I was doing all the vices. I was doing horse racing, liquor, and gambling, and then eventually got back into being part of the Gambling Commission. So yeah, so I don't know if I'm the only attorney on the panel, but originally from Ohio, so nice to see the Bobcats as part of this, and graduated from John Carroll University in Cleveland and then Seattle University School of Law.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Why don't we kick it right off with Kevin, and I guess then we could talk to Mia and Brian after and talk about what are the challenges, maybe Kevin, or maybe the advantages or challenges that you guys had as being one of the early adopters, one of the first states to go. So PASPA gets repealed, and basically it's Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Mississippi kind of were the first 4 out of the gate. Maybe you could talk about what were some of the things that you faced being one of those early adopters right out of the gate? I think you're on mute still, Kevin. Sorry
about that. Thanks. I think the legislature here in Pennsylvania did a really good thing from the onset. They promulgated and enabled the statute for sports wagering well before the U.S. Supreme Court issued their opinion. So that gave Pennsylvania the opportunity to get a jump start. It gave us 6 solid months to jump into learning the industry, understanding what the challenges were going to be and what we needed to do to get the industry up and running. Whether you're an early adopter or a late adopter or somewhere in between, it's really important to understand that there's always going to be challenges. From understanding risk management, integrity monitoring, how to formulate regulations, internal control requirements, surveillance and security requirements, also testing of all the equipment. It's something that we had to do from scratch. But given that our legislature enabled the statute well in advance, that gave us an opportunity to plan. So the implementation, of course, is the biggest challenge when you're getting up and running. And to overcome that, I think one of the most important aspects as a regulator and as an operator is to work together and communicate. Communication is key. I don't think, I'm sure you've talked about it past in other panels or webinars that you've had, but when you're working with regulators, communication is absolutely paramount. So one of the first priorities we did when the U.S. Supreme Court did the repeal, we brought in all the various stakeholders into Pennsylvania. They came to Harrisburg. They were knocking on our door literally the next day, which is great. So we brought in all these various companies. They talked about what they do, how they do it, what industry best practices are in their opinion. And we took this along with other research we did on our own and formulated what we called our temporary regulations. So those temporary regulations, in essence, established a framework for us to get the industry up and running. Some of these temporary regulations include things such as just like I indicated, risk management, integrity monitoring, licensure requirements, testing requirements, all the like. Of course, we want to have a strong regulatory oversight, as we do with our land-based casinos, and that carries over into the sports wagering realm as well to ensure the integrity of the product is protected, the public is protected, but at the same time, and just as important, it's important to make sure that the industry is successful. The whole purpose of legalizing sports wagering is to, generate employment, generate tax revenue, establish a new industry that's absolutely successful. So that's a balancing act, and I think we do it really well. But again, I can't stress enough how much as a regulator, it's important, just as important for the industry to be successful as it is to ensure proper regulatory oversight. Having said this, another topic I think is important to address is, going back to something new that we never had to tackle before, and that's the types of wagering and events that we permit to be offered on sporting events. So very early on, just as an example, in New Jersey, their statute does not allow wagering on New Jersey colleges or universities. We don't have that same prohibition within our statute. However, we were very proactive with our colleges and universities in Pennsylvania regarding their questions, concerns with legalized sports betting from the onset. So again, going back to communications, we brought in college administrations and their athletic departments very early on to learn their thoughts, to get their recommendations, to understand their, what they view as being possibly problematic. And overwhelmingly, when we talk to these universities, including Villanova, Penn State, all the big colleges and universities in Pennsylvania, including the University of Pittsburgh, was wagering on player props involving individual performance. So us as a board, we took that to heart. We agreed with the colleges and universities. So, this is just one example of a challenge that we had to overcome, but we established a policy here where we're not going to allow, and we don't allow, wagering on the individual statistical performance of individual athletes. It's important to understand at the collegiate level, student athletes are students first. And that's the message that came across from the universities here in Pennsylvania, and we ultimately agreed with them. So that's just one example of a challenge that we had to overcome. Having said that, that is, we all also have to understand that sports betting is legal in Pennsylvania. So you can wager on collegiate events here in PA, and that includes certain types of prop bets, just not prop bets based on individual performance. So team-based prop bets are permitted. So again, I think, those are two high-level areas that we did address, and that's how we addressed the implementation phase, and that is one, communication. It's very important, and two, just an example is trying to wrap your arms around some of the nuances of sports betting, just as, using the example I just gave, as something that we had to work through.
Thanks, Kevin. That's great. And we see individualized prop bets, in many states, and it certainly is a vulnerability point from an integrity standpoint, and we monitor it very closely. So I thought that was a great point. Mia, you guys kind of were in the middle of states to go, but not only were you in the middle, but you guys had to launch during COVID, which presented its own challenges during, within itself, launching during a COVID environment. Why don't you talk about the challenges you guys faced launching in a new state, trying to use some of the knowledge you learned from Kevin and the folks in New Jersey and Nevada, as well as trying to deal with what happens when you're trying to launch during COVID?
Right. So we had the team somewhat built prior to COVID hitting. It wasn't completely structured in Colorado, but what we were able to do is, once COVID hit, we were all sent home. Implementation for sports betting wasn't supposed to start till May 1. We weren't sure if we were going to even be able to implement because sports weren't being allowed to play, obviously. We didn't have, the casinos were closed, where we had the retail sports betting. We weren't sure what was going to happen, but we decided, we're going to go ahead and proceed forward. We created our team. We developed our the implementation phase, as far as understanding what documents we're going to have to obtain from our operators. It was difficult doing this from home rather than from an office. Was not easy. It was definitely a challenge. Everyone learning how to work Zoom. Zoom was new. Trying to make sure that securities were in place, things like that. It was certainly difficult. We were able to take rules from other states. The director and the deputy director went and visited the other states prior to COVID hitting, and were able to take and learn, what worked, what didn't work from other states. And luckily, prior to COVID hitting, they were able to gather work groups from industry members from other industries, like the casinos. They were able to gather those stakeholders, figure out what worked, what didn't work, created our rules. It's just a matter of us trying to fit everything together during COVID. It was difficult. So.
Well, I think the growth numbers in Colorado have been amazing. So congratulations. From launching in May 1 in the middle of a COVID environment with no real sports going on. And we just saw the September numbers released last week, and they were amazing. And the growth from month to month in Colorado has been amazing. And in terms of engagement and new operators launching with mobile to the handle numbers. So congratulations. You guys have done an amazing job there.
Thank you.
Brian, why don't you talk about some of the challenges that you guys have faced, not only having to deal with trying to get launched during a COVID environment, but also having such a overwhelming tribal impact in your state and what it means, and a little bit different regulatory environment than maybe what Kevin and Mia face.
Certainly, Matt. Thanks. the interesting thing coming in is we're a commission, so we're executive branch, but we're not directed by the governor's office. He appoints five, or the governor will appoint 5 commissioners, and then commissioners kind of set the policy, and we have a director. And as you mentioned, we have sovereign tribes. We actually have 29 tribes, 22 operate 29 tribal casinos, but we also have 45 years. I think we're the second oldest regulatory agency. And so we have 45 years of having card games and raffles, nonprofits. And so the question was going to be, when we saw Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and others start passing laws before PASPA was struck down, and we figured the writing was on the wall, we needed to really get a grasp on kind of what was possible, because we knew when it came to it that not only were we going to be the subject matter experts from a state side that the legislature was going to look to, we also know that we've been kind of trucking along on our gambling for the last however many years, and haven't added a new activity in over a decade. And so gambling has kind of slid under the radar in our state from a legislature standpoint, and there was going to be a lot of questions. So we needed to put together a team together, which we did about 1.5 years ago. We visited the states that were already operational. So we went to, Nevada, Mississippi, New Jersey. We met with Kevin in Pennsylvania, which was very, very helpful for the team. I had frequented sports books from Ohio. So sports and gambling, it was kind of what I had growing up, but there were a lot of folks who were used to more, machines, table games, nonprofits. And so making sure that we had a team of people who were experts in gambling, but also now knew what this new sort of activity could look like, because it can look very different than, maybe what we've been used to for the last, couple decades. So visiting those states, getting that down, and then now having conversations with the tribes and with legislators about the bill and what we needed, because what the sovereign tribes needed, understandably, was going to be different than what we needed. We needed things to cover our jurisdiction and what we felt we needed to do, both with legal and illegal markets, because we hadn't updated gambling laws. So we wanted a little bit more structured criminal activity issues, money laundering, match fixing, those sorts of things. So we were able to get more of that into the law and focus on that, because if it was going to happen with the revenue side, we're a license-based agency, so taxes don't actually ever flow to our agency. So it wasn't something that we were going to necessarily have a primary focus on. It was going to be on, as our motto is, keeping gambling legal and honest, on the law enforcement regulatory side. And so, trying to put together a bill in maybe 6 weeks prior to start of the 2020 January session, pushing it through in 60 days, making sure that at least we were covered with everything that we needed. And it was a bit of a battle there towards the end, and then it came through. And now we're in negotiations with at least 5 tribes. And who we're negotiating with all have very specific operational plans, have very specific ideas, and not necessarily everyone who was as actively involved at the legislature, which is completely understandable. So kind of working through those different models, because each tribe has the sovereign right to negotiate on their own behalf, and we're trying to put together a consistent statewide model.
That's great. That can certainly be a big challenge. And, we've had conversations with a lot of the tribes there. And, I know it's basically like having 20 separate regulatory bodies to negotiate within your state. So that certainly can be a big challenge. And from everything I've heard, everybody thinks you guys have done a great job. So congratulations on all the work so far. And, I had an opportunity when I went out there and testified for the first time to actually fly into Seattle and leave Seattle and drive by and see some of those casinos. And I think people hear the word tribal casinos sometimes, they don't understand how large these properties are, but you guys have some really immense, wonderful properties in Washington. And I think that market's really going to blossom.
Yeah, thank you. I think, it goes unnoticed that we're a $3 billion gambling market, and $2.5 billion is coming through tribal casinos and helping tribal sovereign governments. So it's a big industry.
Yeah, certainly is. So one of the things that I think is one of the hot topics, and it affects each state differently, and I think we hear it about each state differently, is kind of the mobile versus retail discussion. And again, each state is affected differently. Every regulator tries to do what's best for its constituents. Why don't we start with you, Brian? Because I know you have some unique thoughts on the mobile versus retail discussion there, and we'll get the thoughts from everyone on the panel on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been on, I don't know, countless, seen countless panels. I know mobile is kind of where everyone's pushing, but, the unique thing about the PASPA case was it is, kind of federalist principles. Each state is unto their own. And we always have to start with our state constitution, which prohibits all forms of gambling, very similar to New York. And then the legislature has to authorize it. So nothing is allowed unless they authorize it, and they have to authorize it by a 60% vote. So that's, it's not just majority rules, which on our side, we have Democrats and Republicans and maybe 30% or even generally okay with online gambling. That's why we have our own kind of state wire act that prohibits all forms of online gambling unless it's authorized by the legislature. So we're really kind of tied to our laws, and they have to get passed. And what's going to get passed is what's going to make people comfortable. So in this last session, it was retail. I mean, we're focused on retail. The tribes are focused on retail. There's some complexities with the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act as to whether or not, you can do certain things. I think maybe the Ute tribe in Colorado will be an interesting case, depending on how they're running their mobile system and maybe where their servers are and how it relates to the state system. But for us, our tribes wanted to start conservative and wanted to start retail only with mobile on premise because they felt that was the best way of moving forward. We had card rooms that wanted to go online, but with state politics or national politics, it's you have to figure out who gets to the 60% vote. And our legislature on both sides of the animal, because it was bipartisan, definitely felt that retail was kind of where it needed to start. So I know that that's normally not the preferred option, and where the growth may be is online, but our tribes have spent a lot of time and energy, and the state working as partners with them for that tribal gaming agency, and not having uncertainty as to what you can do. How does the Wire Act play? How does IGRA play? This was the first exclusivity. Our tribes don't have exclusivity necessarily on anything now but sports wagering. So kind of what that looks like and how that's going to work, especially when you have 29 tribes all across the state, and 22 have facilities, and the 7 that don't share machines. They lease machines to the other tribes because of how their compacts were set up. So it just online isn't as simple. I know and it's never simple. I don't think there's anything simple about it. That's what we know. We have no online gambling. The one thing that was helpful, I know in New Jersey, and I'll be curious to hear what me and kind of Kevin think about it too, was they had 5 years lead time of online casinos before they had sports wagering. So they had already worked out a lot of things, and we learned a lot from them. And I know when we met with Kevin in Pennsylvania, they were working through some of the issues that New Jersey, was trying to work out 4 or 5 years before. And so, I think we tend to take a slow, methodical approach, and that normally works well for us because when we do launch something, we know they don't have any issues, and we know exactly where we need to be on both the regulatory side, but also on the illegal market side.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Kevin, why don't we talk about your state, Pennsylvania? I mean, the job you guys have done there is amazing. 23 states now with legalized sports betting, and Pennsylvania has the 3rd highest handle and has less operators than some of the other states. So the buzz there, the energy around sports betting has been amazing. But you guys have a very different ratio when it comes to mobile versus retail. Why don't you talk about that and how it works in Pennsylvania?
Sure. So to date, right now, we do have 12 retail locations. Retail locations are required to either be within our commercial casinos. We do have 12 currently casinos up and running. So retail sports wagering is within 12 locations. That includes 10 of the casinos, as well as 2 of our off-track horse racing facilities. Of course, online wagering is legal and operational here in Pennsylvania. And we have 10 online sites right now. As far as revenue goes, year to date through the end of September here, total handle on sports wagering in Pennsylvania was a tad over $2 billion. And that's through the end of September, generating over $81 million in revenue. So that's where we are as far as the locations and what's being offered. But to touch on mobile versus retail, I'll touch briefly on retail first, and then maybe spend a little bit more time on online, because just as Brian indicated, it is much more involved. So with retail, of course, it's relatively straightforward. It's somewhat similar to other forms of gaming that are already within the casinos. You have to look at security and surveillance, internal controls, ensuring revenue is calculated correctly. Looking at the physical layout of the books, et cetera. And we found that retail sports wagering is a complement to our casinos. Of course, there's great viewing areas. It brings in an entirely new demographic we've never seen before. And that demographic comes in. The casinos have great viewing areas, great seating, food and beverage outlets that provide some good service to the customers. And having said that, sports betting, we've seen, a lot of good crossover, both with food and beverage, as well as table games. Of course, the new demographic does like to play poker. They like to play blackjack, and we're seeing a lot of crossover with the sports betting patrons to our table games, and vice versa. So retail is very successful, but I think it's more important to maybe spend a little bit more time on retail, or on online sports wagering. Online sports wagering in Pennsylvania generates 90% of the revenue. It really drives revenue in the Commonwealth. Only about 10% is generated by retail. I'm not saying that retail isn't important, because it is, but revenue is really driven by online wagering, because you can wager anywhere within the state. You don't have to be physically located in the casino. You can be virtually anywhere as long as you're within the borders of the state. So some of the things that we really had to look at with online that really doesn't exist in retail is one, geolocation requirements. Of course, it's by law you have to be physically located in the state in order to place a bet. So we work really closely with geolocation providers. Make sure and test to make sure that technology is working appropriately. If you cross the border while you're in the middle of a gaming session on a sports wagering website, you're going to be logged out. You're not going to be able to place wagers, almost instantaneous. So that was something that really differentiates online from retail. It's just the technology itself and some of those challenges that need to be overcome. Also, server locations. Brian also referenced servers in his previous comments. Servers have to be located in Pennsylvania as well. So when the operators are getting up and running, we inspect those server locations. We make sure that they're secure. We make sure that the people who access those servers are appropriately licensed, all the like. So geolocation is very important, and that differentiates itself from retail. Second, I think it's really important to take a look at other aspects of online that really don't exist in retail, and that is player account management. We're talking about payment providers, how do patrons make deposits and withdrawals. These are all things that don't exist in the retail environment. We make sure that all those companies are appropriately licensed, their technology works appropriately. And patrons can have a seamless experience on these various websites. So, another caveat here with online that a lot of other jurisdictions really haven't had to address that differentiates Pennsylvania from others is the different tax rates in online sports wagering. So, of course, not only online sports wagering, but also interactive slots, tables, and poker are illegal here as well, and they all operate on the same platforms. So one thing we have to look at is we have to ensure that revenue is calculated correctly based on the various tax rates. Tax rates on sports is at 36%, slot machines is at 55%, and tables is at 16%. So every transaction that flows through an online platform, we have to ensure the operators are able to accurately track those transactions. So every time you spin a slot machine, we need to make sure that it's appropriately allocated to that vertical. We call them different verticals of gaming: slots, tables, poker, sports. So a lot of work went into that, and that's something that really wasn't present in states like New Jersey. They have the same tax rate across the board. So when a lot of the operators came to Pennsylvania, they brought the technology with them. That didn't work here because of the different tax rates. We need to make sure that every transaction is allocated appropriately. So that's another area that online really differs from retail itself. And as a regulator, another point I'd like to make is, and I really can't ignore on a panel, of course, is compulsive and problem gambling. Both in retail and online sports, we do have what we call a self-exclusion list. So if anybody identifies as having a problem gambling, an issue with their gambling, both in retail and online, they can sign up for the self-exclusion list to where they won't be able to game. So if you're on the retail prohibition list, if you get caught within the casino, you could be charged with misdemeanor by law enforcement. That's a good deterrent to try to help people. The same holds true with online gaming. If you have an online gaming account, you can sign up for the same type of exclusion where you won't be able to establish an account and log in. But it goes beyond that with online. We implemented some other good tools for individuals to use if they so choose. So if you're online and you want to limit the amount of wagering that you're doing on the website, we have various tools for patron. That includes spend limits. How much can you spend on any given day, week, or month? Deposit limits, the same. How much can you deposit in any given day, week, or month? Session time limits. How long can you actually be on the website? After a half an hour, if you sign up for a half an hour session limit, you're going to get kicked off. You won't be able to get back on for 24 hours. So those are some really good tools that are in addition to what we see in the retail space to help individuals that may identify as having a problem, also a problem gambling concern.
Great. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Yeah.
Mia, you guys have a lot of retail properties and casinos across the state. If you want to talk about, and then we'll move on to another topic, the mobile versus retail discussion in Colorado.
Yeah, so we have about 33 properties or casinos in Colorado across 3 gaming towns. So in order to place a wager, a sports betting wager, or play at a table game or slot, you would need to go to one of those 3 towns. And those are in the mountains and can create some logistic issues. Some people that are living way down south in southern Colorado, it would take them a long time to get up to the mountain towns. Retail or the online application that we have, it allows patrons to wager across the state. So they don't have to go to one of the mountain towns to place a wager or to participate in sports betting. So we're seeing a larger number of online wagering opposed to in the retail sector. So that is the difference. The other thing too is when COVID did hit here in Colorado, that was the only way to place a wager because casinos were closed. So the only way to participate in sports betting was through an online application. So, and we've seen because of that, because of COVID, more and more people are participating through the online applications rather than going to the mountain towns. So, and in order to sign or in order to be an online operator, they need to associate with a retail casino. So a casino can have both an online and retail operator signed up with them. So there are only a certain amount of operators that are allowed here in Colorado, obviously, because they need to be attached to the casino property. although we do have 33, that is quite a bit. So that does allow for a lot of licenses. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see as the industry progresses and grows and matures, to see how many remain or are still here in Colorado. We're hoping that they're all still here.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. I know that we have a lot of questions and we want to get to them, but I did want to bring up this last topic really quickly because I think it's interesting and a lot of people have asked me about it. And maybe, Brian, we could start with you. And if Kevin and Mia, if you have some thoughts on it as well, then we can jump into that real quickly and we'll try to save at least 10 minutes for questions. But I know this is something that came up, and maybe we should start with Kevin, because Pennsylvania, you're probably seeing it more already, is the effects of consolidation on the marketplace. As more and more of these giant mergers happen, we're seeing these massive consolidations, and it affects the consumers differently, licensing differently. There's a lot of effects from both a consumer and regulator standpoint. Do you have any thoughts on consolidation in the marketplace and how it might be affecting sports betting in Pennsylvania?
I may be a little bit brief with this one, but consolidation always occurs in the gaming industry. We see it in the slot-based, in slots and tables and the land-based casinos, the various manufacturers, suppliers of slot machines, table games, etc. We also are seeing it here in the sports wagering realm here as of late. It really doesn't impact us too significantly. To be honest, of course, whenever a merger or acquisition is proposed, it does need to be vetted and approved by our board. So we do have our Bureau of Licensing and a separate unit called our Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement. They will fully vet the financial fitness and the viability of those proposals before they're approved. So that can be a lengthy process. We see it all the time. In the sports wagering realm, of course, it's already occurring. We've seen Flutter Entertainment, parent company of FanDuel, acquiring Stars Group that owns and operates various a website platform here in Pennsylvania as well. They operate PokerStars. We've also seen DraftKings with their acquisition of Stars Group, not Stars Group, SB Tech, and they're here. They're both here and operating here in Pennsylvania as well. So they're just two examples. We work through them. Of course, if the industry thinks it's in their best interest, we just make sure it's an appropriate transaction, and if deemed appropriate, it's approved, and we move forward. So I'll leave it at that. Perhaps Brian and Mia have some additional comment.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. Brian, do you have any thoughts on the consolidation within the marketplace and any potential final thoughts too before we get to questions?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. I think I said it before, state tax revenue isn't something that we are concerned with. It's not our mission, it's not our charge. And quite frankly, most of the revenue is going through the sovereign tribal governments. But licensing fees, and our agency is funded for everything, including criminal law enforcement, which is significant from licensing fees. So, I think it's pretty standard to keep that in place. Kevin's absolutely right. Consolidation's been happening in the marketplace for a decade plus in machines, table games, even in like bingo. Consolidation's been happening. But for us, it's just keeping that in mind as when we're negotiating with tribes, because they're co-regulators and they may have their own licensing system as well, as setting something up. So you're keeping that in mind that in maybe 5 years, there may not be 10 operators. There may only really be 5. Or there may be something local plus some sort of bigger folks. And, as a regulator, Kevin has said it many times, and I think is incredibly true, is communication is important. And at least in my experience, in the short time I've been here, 5 years, the larger the company, the larger that communication chain can break down. And especially something for a new activity, it's just something you need to probably work a little bit harder on. And there's a lot of paperwork that's usually involved in vetting and making sure investors, especially with all these investment companies out there, I think, you'll find in every state there's going to be a lot of investigation background and those sorts of things that are going to happen. But for us, it's to make sure that we're setting up a licensing structure that we don't have to try and fix in 3 to 5 years. That's going to be really the key. Luckily, we have a lot of experience, and we can look to states like Colorado and Pennsylvania, who are doing a great job to kind of help us as we, look for a vision of what sports gambling is going to look like for the next, 100 years in the state of Washington.
Thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate it. Mia, any comment on consolidation or final thoughts, and then we'll take some questions?
All I can say is that it has, like 2020, it's taught us to pivot and adjust quickly. Because, state keeps us on our toes.
The one interesting thing about consolidation is, and I think the one effect that doesn't maybe affect regulators as much, but does consumers, is that sometimes competition is good for the consumer. The more operators there are, the more likely there are to compete for promos and offer better prices. And thus, I think competition is oftentimes better for the consumer. Whereas, once all this consolidation happens, there's less options and thus maybe less striving to offer more promos and things that are beneficial to the customer. So sometimes competition is good, although I don't want to say that we don't think that consolidation is good, because it is. But for the customer standpoint, sometimes that competition's great. So I know we have a bunch of questions, and I want to make sure we at least save a few minutes to answer a couple. So Scott, if you or Steve want to go ahead and fire a couple away, and we'll have the appropriate folks answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to everyone who submitted a question. We've got a number of them. So Steve and I looked at a few of them, and so we're going to toss a few out here to our panel. So first up, what role did local and state law enforcement play in the advent of sports betting in each particular state? Specifically, was there any type of training or networking that took place for the law enforcement agencies on a subject that they might not have had as much experience dealing with?
Kevin, you want to take first crack? Kevin, Mia, Brian, if you guys have a particularly strong answer on any of these questions, maybe just give me a little hands up. But Kevin, this one's probably right in your wheelhouse. Brian, I saw you put your hand up as well. Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so we're a little different than Brian's group. We are a regulatory agency, but we're not a law enforcement agency, like the group up in Washington State. However, having said that, we do work very closely with the Pennsylvania State Police. The state troopers are stationed within all of our casinos on a regular basis, providing law enforcement within the casinos themselves. So they do have a presence. Having said that, when retail sports wagering got up and running, as well as online sports wagering, there was various training that was provided to both regulators and state police. State police participated. So state police are well versed with sports betting in Pennsylvania within the casinos. They sat in the same training sessions as I did, learning the ropes very early on. So to answer your question, yeah, law enforcement is involved. If we see a particular issue as a regulator that may be criminal in nature, of course, we refer it directly to them. We'll handle it from a regulatory standpoint. We'll handle any issues we need to handle directly with the patron and the casino from a regulatory perspective. But criminal matters are handled by law enforcement in Pennsylvania, and we'll make that referral when necessary.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. You had some thoughts on that as well, Brian?
Yeah, just quickly. I think the nice thing about sports betting has been going on forever. So we've been doing illegal sports betting investigations the entirety that we've existed. We've been doing online, illegal, black market, offshore investigations. At the same time, we were doing the Black Friday stuff with the feds. We're working with feds. We're working with other states. To me, I think the key is that kind of, and we put, as I mentioned earlier, we put certain updates into our laws related to match fixing, money laundering, and other integrity provisions to make sure that we had the hook on folks in the illegal market. So we ensured that we were going to, be able to do what we needed to do on the regulated market. I do think it is key. The feds have a lot of things going on, and as states, we continue to talk to Nevada. I know my folks have been talking with Colorado. We talked to Pennsylvania, and every state has their top priorities. For us, law enforcement's a top priority because we're a law enforcement agency, and everybody turfs all the gambling stuff to us, and we do actually all of the criminal stuff for both the lottery and horse racing if they have criminal activity. So, we look forward to continue to network and hopefully kind of bring that along. I know, Matt, you and I have had many conversations about this of bringing along a consortium of states, whether it's through their state patrols or their state gambling agencies or both, that can continue to kind of build upon that, because we've all been working on criminal stuff. We know what money laundering looks like, and we know what it's going to look like through the book before we even open up the first regulated book. So, yeah, it's something, at least from Washington State, that it was top of our priority list to think about and take care of. And I'm sure we'll be training other law enforcement agencies as soon as we get the regulated space up and running.
And so much of it, thank you, Brian. And so much of it too goes back to Kevin's point of communication. These things don't happen in a bubble in one state all the time. They happen across multiple states. And the fact that we can all communicate together and try to stop these interstate criminal activities is important as well. So thank you very much. I see that there's a bunch of questions, Scott, so we'll try to get to a few. And then for the ones that we don't get to, I recommend to folks, if you have questions directly for myself or Kevin or Mia or Brian, please feel free to reach out to them and ask them your questions. These are the people who are the regulators in the state, and I'm sure they get a ton of questions, but we'll be happy to try to answer when available.
Absolutely. All right, so next up, it's a perennial question that has come up several times and in several different ways from our audience. But if we look into the crystal ball for 2021, specifically, can you talk about Ohio and California and what we may expect there, and then any other states that have some updates on the horizon?
Sure, I don't see any hands going up, so I'll try to take that one. Look, I think on a state-by-state basis, I would always tell people this. If you're interested in what's happening in your particular state, then reach out to the legislatures in that state. Reach out to the people who are in charge of that in your state. Ohio, we've all seen, is getting very close, and they're probably expected to go in 2021. A state the size of California, there's a lot of different constituents and challenges there, but I would always say reach out to your state legislature. Someone in that state has to propose a bill and get a bill through, and find out who's championing those bills and reach out to them and see if you'd like to be a part of it or testify or how you can help or where the state's at. I always recommend reaching out to those states, exactly because these situations are so fluid. We might say, well, this is where we think it's at now, but you never know. Then a bill gets shot down, or there's issues over enforcement, or who's going to handle tax situations, and it can become tricky. So I don't think anyone on this panel wants to get too definitive on how any of the other states are doing.
Fair enough. The next question is about Pennsylvania for Kevin.
Kevin.
There you go. Kevin, do you know what cities or areas have embraced the sports gambling the most? Like, for example, are more wagers being placed in Philly or Pittsburgh?
Really good question. So, of course, we're really, our sports books in Pennsylvania are really geographically spread out. So we have retail sports books all over the state, from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, from Erie, central Pennsylvania, northeast Pennsylvania. They're not in just one small area of the state, like, for example, Atlantic City. As far as where most wagers are placed, of course, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh are big sporting towns. We got the Steelers and the Pirates and Penguins in Pittsburgh, and we have all the sporting teams in Philadelphia: the Flyers, the Sixers, the Eagles. So I would say, of course, Philadelphia is a bigger city, much bigger city than Pittsburgh. So if I were to guess, I can't say definitively, but if I were to guess, I would say more wagers are placed in the Philadelphia region, more than anywhere else. Of course, you have to realize that online gambling is legal as well. So you could be anywhere. As long as you were within the border, you can place a bet. But Philadelphia does have a really good market. They have a really incredible fan base for their sporting teams. So that's one market in particular that we see a lot of volume from.
Excellent. Our next question comes from a Seattle-based aspiring entrepreneur. He says that they're looking to build an online peer-to-peer platform to make low-risk, non-cash fun bets. For example, betting a beer or meals, a la that mayors do often, amongst friends and colleagues. Is that legal in any of your states? It sounds like a possible no in Washington, as they're looking to consider incorporating in a more friendly state.
Anybody got any peer-to-peer thoughts? Peer-to-peer?
Yeah, so we don't have any peer-to-peer right now. Having said that, as far as legality goes, going back to a point that Mia made earlier, all of our sports books, they're issued what's called a sports wagering certificate. The only companies that can apply for and obtain a sports wagering certificate are slot machine licensees. That's our existing commercial casinos. So if you're looking to do something like that on your own in Pennsylvania, of course, we could always take a look at it. But most likely it may not be permitted. I can't say that for sure without reviewing it in detail, of course. But my best recommendation, if you're an entrepreneur and you have a new product and you'd like to get into the business, work directly, if you're looking at Pennsylvania, work directly with the commercial casinos, because they're by statute the only entities that are legally able to offer sports betting in the state. You could perhaps enter into some sort of partnership with them, but to do it on your own, without taking a closer look at it, I can't say yes or no, but that would be your best bet here in PA.
Great answer. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, you're going to want to talk to an attorney, because you're both going to want to know what you can do where you're at, like in Washington State. Yeah, you don't want us knocking on your door because we find out you're running something through your office, even if it's going out of state, because nothing's allowed to be going in or out unless authorized in Washington State. And kind of like in a lot of the kind of retail casino industry, everything has to run through a land-based tribal casino right now. But also you want to make sure every state's different. I mean, there may be some states that are going to look at peer-to-peer, like New Jersey or others, but I mean, in Washington State, it's just not conceptually something that was authorized, and so I don't even think it could be allowed. And if it would have to be allowed only at a tribal casino or through a mobile app within a tribal casino.
Excellent. All right, well, guys, we've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to toss out one final question, and that is, let's see here. From a competition, consumer satisfaction, and revenue number standpoint, New Jersey has quickly become a market leader. In defining your new marketplaces in Pennsylvania and Colorado specifically, to what extent did you consult with the state of New Jersey?
You want to start, Kev?
Sure. Of course, New Jersey borders us. Pennsylvania, it's right across the bridge there. You can jump over into New Jersey. We did work with the DGE pretty extensively early on. Of course, everybody knows that they led the charge to get sports wagering up and running in the United States, and they did a really good job. Their regulatory structure is sound. We do talk to not only the New Jersey regulators, but all regulators. We bounce industry best practices off of each other. We ask questions. Communication is key, and it's not just with operators, it's also with other regulators. If you look at our regulatory framework, we did take a lot of the best practices that were implemented in New Jersey, and you're going to see a lot of those same practices here in Pennsylvania. So to answer your question, of course, New Jersey does great. And yes, we did work with them really early on to learn some industry best practices of what worked well and what didn't work well in New Jersey, and we carried a lot of that over here in Pennsylvania.
At some point, Kevin, they're going to be asking people, did you guys talk to Pennsylvania? Because everyone says Pennsylvania could be number one. You guys are doing amazing numbers. Hopefully 6 months we come back and do this, they'll be saying, so did you guys talk to Pennsylvania when you were launching?
All right, well, guys, just to wrap up, I know a lot of questions went unanswered. So if you saw Steve Pastorino's comment in the chat section, he said, go ahead and submit those unanswered questions to U.S. Integrity's website. That's usintegrity.com. If you want to submit it there, they will work to get you an answer. And one really common question was, how do you get into the sports gambling industry space if you want to work in that space? And to that question, I would say go check out our website, sportsgamblingeducation.com, and the frequently asked questions section there. So I just want to thank all of our panelists. If you joined late or you want to replay the recording of today's webinar, go subscribe to the Sports Gambling Education YouTube channel. You'll find that link in the homepage at the top of sportsgamblingeducation.com. And again, don't forget the third course of our 3-course master's certification. That's Innovation and Insights from Sports Gambling Stakeholders, featuring a discussion with Basil DeVito, Steve Pastorino, and Robert Walker. That launches Monday, November 16th. So thank you all for attending. Thank you again to all of our panelists, and have a fantastic rest of your week.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Mia. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.